Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you that have joined the last Regional Aquaculture Review webinar FAO is organizing this week. We had several webinars organized during the past few days, and this is the last one in terms of a regional review. It will be followed by the very last review tomorrow, which is going to be the Global Aquaculture Review. So my name is Alessandro Lovatelli. I will be your moderator today. So let's start the webinar, and people are still joining us, but allow me to pass the word to Matthias Halvert, the head of the aquaculture branch of the Fisheries Division of FAO. Matthias, please, the word is yours.
Thank you, Sandro. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is the 6th in a series of 7 consecutive webinars. There are a number of important reasons for FAO to be organizing these events this week. First, the year 2020 has kicked off with a reaffirmation of our global commitment and call of coordinated and accelerated actions towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. So what role can and will aquaculture play in this decade of action? And what actions should be prioritized for a better impact of aquaculture, particularly for the Zero Hunger goal? These are key questions we had wanted to discuss at the FAO NACA Global Conference on Aquaculture Millennium Plus 20, which was supposed to be held in Shanghai, China this week. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to postpone the conference. And in agreement with our host, the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, is now scheduled for new dates 22 to 27 September 2021. Now, proposing future actions for greater impact in aquaculture should be informed by sound knowledge, by facts and figures. And that brings me to my second point. At FAO, we have been compiling these reviews since 1995, every 5 years. And we are about to complete the 2020 edition right now. So providing our latest results, as we had planned to do in Shanghai, is precisely the background and purpose for engaging with you now. What will be presented today are the key messages, the main challenges, and importantly, the options for the way forward for aquaculture in the Latin America and Caribbean region. Presentations and discussions with distinguished panelists representing different stakeholder groups will complement the agenda, and I believe we can all look forward to a very interesting and stimulating exchange. Enjoy the webinar, and thank you for your attention. Back to you, Sandro.
Matthias, thank you very much. We will start the webinar by listening a recorded video message from Dr. Antonio Gaza de Yita, who is the Secretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture of the state of Tamaulipas from Mexico. Actually, Antonio is here with us today, and so we can ask him further questions during the question and answer session. But before we do that, let me briefly introduce you to the program. Following this key message from Antonio, we will have the consultants that work for FAO to present the review. Following this, we will have a series of recorded video messages from panelists which are with us today, and then we will open the question and answer session. I would like to remind you all that this webinar, as the ones before, is being recorded, and the recording will be made available. And should you have any question, please use the button question and answer at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I would like to invite our secretariat to launch the recorded video message from Antonio Gaza de Ita. Please.
Welcome to the Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Aquaculture Review for the invitation. It's an honor for myself, the State of Tamaulipas, and the World Aquaculture Society to participate in this important event. I would like to congratulate the FAO team for their excellent work on putting together this very accurate review. As you know, the LAC region is a very diverse one that encompasses 50 countries in which aquaculture has developed in many different ways. It is true, the region has seen the consolidation of important industries as the ones of salmon, shrimp, and tilapia, but the potential and many opportunities are still there. In reality, aquaculture has not permeated yet in the LAC culture. Less than 18% of the total fish production comes from aquaculture, and the consumption per caput per year in the region is around 10 kilograms, half of the world's average. The biggest challenge we're facing to consolidate aquaculture in the LAC region is that governments still need to value its importance. It's a fact that aquaculture is in the mind and speeches of most of the regional decision makers, but that has not been reflected in the national budgets and priorities, with very few exceptions. Aquaculture needs to be thought not only as the production of fish, but that the industry of producing fish, in which many other activities need to be contemplated. A thorough strategic planning needs to be addressed in many areas, contemplating markets, service providers, capacity building, investment and financing, seafood consumption promotion, inclusion of fish protein on vulnerable population diets, digitalization, access to markets, associativity, and regional cooperation. When developing markets, aquaculture must target the final consumer demands. Market tendencies have evolved, and so the produce of aquaculture requires to. The industry needs to focus on processing value-added products that fulfill the necessities of the current lifestyle. Capacity building programs should aim to the professionalization of the industry in all the value chain and at all levels, including government personnel that needs to keep up with the new technological advances. For the activity to grow, investment funds dedicated to aquaculture need to be generated, many of them with public and private money. Promoting and financing aquaculture projects at a competitive rate will be a key factor that could define the pace at which our industry develops in the region. Aquaculture business accelerators could promote the growth of aquaculture at a faster rate and could be a good tool to promote the inclusion of women and youngsters, preventing them to have to migrate in search of employment opportunities. The step to digitalization of the aquaculture sector is inevitable. Allowing the producers of all sizes to control their inventories and access the markets via e-commerce will imply a change of paradigms and require strong cooperation and associativity. The sooner we take this step, the better. Regional cooperation within LAC is a must if we want to optimize the limited resources, especially through promoting intra-regional markets and scientific cooperation. When thinking about the future, we need to consider both small and large-scale aquaculture. Both have different challenges. We need to be very careful, especially at the small-scale level, to not repeat the mistakes from the past and promote non-financially viable opportunities. Good and responsible extension programs, always based on solid science and financial analysis, could result in more successful projects at all levels. We also need to consider large-scale aquaculture as an important tool to generate well-paid jobs and improve the quality of life of anyone associated to the sector. The LAC region must analyze the potential of culturing filter feeders and algae and the positive impacts that this could generate in rural communities. These activities could transform many regions and promote the development of many currently isolated areas. A key component for the future, as it's very accurately stated in this review, is innovation. We need to target efforts on technologies that have the lowest environmental footprint and that use the resources in the best possible way. We have to, if we really want to position aquaculture as the most sustainable method of producing animal protein. Finally, I consider it's a duty of all of us to communicate our story, to position aquaculture in the vox populi. Academia, governments, producers, and NGOs who relate to aquaculture have to come together and spread the benefits of the activity. Aquaculture should be a concept that is included in all education programs in the region as soon as possible. The potential is there, although there's a lot that still needs to be done for aquaculture to acquire the regional relevance that it deserves. Let's work together. Enjoy the webinar.
Don Antonio, thank you very much for your key message. You covered a lot of very important points. I think, I mean, it's difficult to summarize something which was so clear, but I think I would like to say that it really did come across that the LAC region is a very diverse region. And within this diversity, you have some very important large realities and industries, but there are many, many more opportunities that can be developed. I think one of your key points there was that although there's a lot of discussion on aquaculture in the region, the development of aquaculture is not really reflected properly in the national priorities of many of the countries that do have the potential. I also like the message of creating job opportunities for the youth to stop migrations away from rural areas. And again, the importance of regional cooperation. And your last point, I think it was interesting when you mentioned that aquaculture is not only industry, but it's also small scale aquaculture, and both need to be supported financially and making sure that both don't have they have a very low environmental footprint. With this, allow me to introduce the authors of the regional review. The regional review was prepared by 3 authors which are well known in the Latin American reality and beyond. One is Don Carlos Wurman. He's an aquaculture consultant, well known in Latin America and to FAO, and I would say throughout the world. Followed by Doris Soto. Doris Soto has been with FAO for many years, and she was, let's say, spearheaded the ecosystem approach to aquaculture. So welcome, Doris. And Ricardo Norambuena, who's from the Center of Oceanographic Research at the University of Concepcion in Chile. I must add that I forgot to mention that Doris is now the principal scientist of the Interdisciplinary Center for Aquaculture Research in Chile. So, Carlos, it would be if you could actually share your screen, and once your screen is up, please, you can start with the presentation. Okay, I can see your screen. Please go ahead. Launch. Perfect. Thank you. Carlos, you have to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Best regards from Chile. We will be having the pleasure of introducing you to our regional review of aquaculture in Latin America and the Caribbean. This work has been prepared by myself, Carlos Wurman, by Dr. Doris Soto, and biologist Ricardo Norambuena. And we have had we have been helped by 2 groups of people, one from World Fisheries Trust and another group of Brazilian friends that you can see listed in this slide. As you know, the Latin American region and the Caribbean is a very diverse region. We are talking here about 50 countries and territories, 28 of them in the Caribbean, 8 of them in Central America, and 14 in South America. However, most of our population is concentrated in South America and Central America. In terms of data sources, we have used the usual ones, the FAO information, UN reports, national reports, expert reports, and so on. And you can review them all in this slide. So let me start just by reviewing some of what we consider to be the continued and changing trends in our part of the world. In terms of the continuing trends, we are in a region where population is still growing moderately, but growing, as opposed to what happens in other parts. In terms of aquaculture, we have an industry which is highly concentrated, not only in terms of countries, but also in terms of species. Another feature of our aquaculture industry is that most of whatever is being produced is exported. And as well, a high proportion of whatever we produce has a high average value. In general terms, I can tell you that the LAC region has the highest value of aquaculture products in the world, but for the case of Oceania, that is producing a relatively small amount of products. We're still producing aquaculture based on alien species. We call alien species that have been introduced over 100 years ago, though. Some of them in the last 10 or 20 years, but some of them, like salmon, over 100 years ago, still called alien species. And a high proportion of our production in Latin America is marine production, a fact that opposes to what happens in the world as an average, where there's a continental aquaculture predominates. Another feature is that whatever is being produced, most species are farmed below 5,000 tons per year, a quantity which is not extremely relevant in many parts. And another thing is that we have a very low seafood consumption. What are the new and changing trends that we would like to highlight today? Well, that we see that aquaculture growth rates are diminishing, and this is mainly because of poor governance and public perception and acceptance in our view. Another thing is that the number of species being farmed is increasing. We had about 80 species being farmed at the turn of the century. We are now talking about 91, 92 species farmed. Aquaculture is augmenting its contribution to total fish production in the area from 4% in the year 2000 to about 18% by 2018. We're also happy to report that we have improved biosecurity measures a lot, and that a lot of diversification efforts are taking place with native species now in Latin American countries. However, as you will see in a minute, these efforts have not been very successful this far. And finally, COVID-19 really, unfortunately, is having a significant impact on employment, production, and exports. In terms of figures of our continent, you can see here that we have augmented production from 1.9 million tons in the year 2010 to 3.1 million tons in 2018. In this last year, production was valued at about $17.2 billion US. If these trends continue in the future, we expect that by the year 2030, these 3.1 million tons will turn into 4.5 to 4.6 million tons. A fact that is worrying us is this here, that growth rates are diminishing in the LAC region, and we believe very strongly that a good part of this explanation, it is explained by the fact that we have poor governance. as I mentioned at the start, we are in a part of the world that consumes very little amount of fish. As a matter of fact, Antonio Garza just mentioned that we consume about 10 kilos per year per person here, as opposed to 20 years as a world average. You can see in this figure here that consumption is rather high in the Caribbean area, but these figures do not produce many effects on the local average, as the Caribbean area has little population only. We see that aquaculture still contributes rather poorly to local consumption, as most of whatever is being produced is exported. And on the other hand, we see that fish is expensive, it's not a cheap product, and fish competes with more easily accessed and cheaper poultry and pork products throughout the region. And of course, there's a long-term tradition of eating red meats in the area that conflicts with our wishes to expand fish consumption in the area. In general terms, aquaculture is important in many parts of our subcontinent, as South America excels in exports and produces a lot of trade surpluses, while there are other areas like the Caribbean that remains being net importers. What can we do to improve our relatively poor domestic fish consumption? There's not much we can do in the short term. We have to plan and work long term if we want to improve domestic fish consumption. We have to promote production of cheaper and accessible products and make fish more competitive. We have to improve education and communication. And of course, we have to develop adequate long-term policies and plans. Finally, before before handing this conversation to Doris, I will show you the last slide here. This area is highly concentrated in South America production. Most of whatever is being produced in terms of aquaculture happens in South America, as you can well see here. In the year 2018, about 86% of production is in South America. And in terms of value, this amounts to 91% of aquaculture production. So even though production is growing in Central America, there's a lot of concentration in the South American scene. And as you can well see here, the Caribbean is only starting to produce in terms of aquaculture. It is a feature, though, that in each sub-region, 4 countries dominate production. In the case of the Caribbean, we're talking about Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Haiti. In Central America is Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. And in South America, Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, and Colombia dominate this landscape. What could we do to try to diminish these differences among regions? We could try to reduce access gaps through better governance and public perception and improve economic, technological conditions, among others. And we have to prioritize and promote viable policies, programs, and projects in each subregion based on cooperation, sustainability, and participation of local community. Let me just pass this presentation to Doris. She will continue with the next slides. Please, Doris.
Thank you, Carlos. Next slide. Okay. We decided to provide a specific view for mariculture and inland aquaculture because they are very different. Significant mariculture production in the region, but with limited results with diversification efforts. As you see in this figure to the right, 96% of marine production is concentrated in these 5 species, and they continue to grow, especially the white-legged shrimp and the Atlantic salmon. Very limited production of other marine species. You can see here below some of the ones that appear in the statistics, and you see, for example, the Peruvian scallop that used to be important shows a very sharp decline. Graphilaria is increasing a little bit, and we see some other species increasing, but in general, production is very low. There are high average values per kilogram. Carlos already discussed that, and there's very limited impact on local consumption. because most of this production is being exported. So the options for the way forward are to encourage low trophic level species. But again, in order to do that, we have to increase the market and the market access. We have to improve technologies and access new ones. For example, open ocean farming and recirculating systems can be very important for countries with short space, for example, in Central America and the Caribbean, while other countries like Brazil, Mexico, Peru, and Argentina still have an important space to increase mariculture. Definitely, we need to improve governance and research and development efficiency and private sector participation in innovation, including the small farmer and the smaller enterprises. Next one, please. Next one, please. For freshwater production in the region is essentially dominated by tilapia and by Amazon species. And the characins that you see here in this figure are also important in the region, and they have a high impact on rural communities. The growth by 28% in the last 5 years is mainly due to tilapia. You can see the very big growth. Well, native species increased some, but there's small, real decreases in others. So most inland aquaculture is small and medium scale with varying degrees of technology. As we already mentioned, there's a relevant role on local national nutrition, food security, and work opportunities. So here we do have an important opportunity and a challenge. And options for the way forward include increased production and diversification, but in order to do that, we need to address new knowledge and technical and market constraints. Of course, tilapia is successful because we already have an imported package for this production, but we need to do the job in research and development, feeds, and so on for the other species. We need to address market constraint and economic efficiency problems. Perhaps it's a good idea to concentrate research and development resources in fewer species in order to really move forward. The next one, please. The climatic variability and climate change are also seen as key elements for today and for the future. Knowledge and impacts and adaptation options are slowly developing in the region. Climatic variability is very important, and we never forget the ENSO, El Nino events, and they have normally negative effects on aquaculture. We saw the impacts the last big El Nino. Also, extreme weather events in the Caribbean and Central America are a permanent threat. Climate change will affect inland aquaculture by increasing air and water temperatures and decreasing freshwater availability and or delivery patterns. However, we know very little, almost nothing on specific impacts on some species and aquaculture systems. So these are general expert opinions. Mariculture, we have more information on that, will be impacted by precipitation changes, increases in temperature, wave heights, algal blooms, ocean acidification that could affect mollusk and crustacean farming. What can we do to increase sectoral resilience? Of course, we should improve our efforts to assess risk and vulnerability. And you see here an example, a climate change risk map for mussel farming in Chile that is we have very recently produced. And this is very important for the monitoring of environmental and climatic conditions as well, and facilitating early warning. Definitely better spatial planning and management of production is a win-win approach for adaptation, and we should never forget that. And the existence of risk maps is very important in order to give us orientation on that regard. Diversification of production, of course, could be another way of increased adaptation. Currently, we have too many eggs in one basket. The next one, please. Well, the COVID pandemic has had an important impact in the region and everywhere. High concentration of exports on few markets pose a high risk for aquaculture. We all know about travel restrictions and lockdowns due to the pandemics, slow down production, and the need to search for alternative destinations, sometimes at big loss. We have seen this pattern in salmon, in shrimp. A depressed global economy, lower demand. So this is an important threat. Also, pandemic affect large and small scale producer, and especially important for small scale producer, and especially important also for women, because women are involved in the processing and marketing part, and they are definitely more affected. Options for the way forward, again, promote product and market diversification, pay more attention to domestic demand, and perhaps here we have an opportunity to increase bringing our products to the local areas or countries or even in the region. And also promote public-private coordination and risk prevention. We have seen important, good examples of this, and people are adapting rapidly in some cases. Next one, please. This is an important issue when we talk about how to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, because they sort of cover all of the issues we have been talking about. The problem is that there are trade-offs and different time scales to achieve individual goals, and government policies hardly address those trade-offs and balances. And I'll give some examples here using also this figure to the right, where we show some of the most relevant Sustainable Development Goals for tilapia and exotic species, and for currency native species. In the case of tilapia, for example, we have definitely contributed to food security and livelihoods, but we have environmental impacts, and that's a trade-off. Same thing with salmon farming. We have increased livelihood and quality employment with high impact on employment for women at the local level, for example. But there are potential threats to ecosystem functions and integrity. And then on the other hand, small-scale aquaculture that could have relevant contribution to livelihoods and with potential lower environmental impacts often struggle to remain in business. So we have all these different trade-offs that we need to face. And the options for the way forward, of course, we can diversify towards native species with greater impact on local food security and nutrition. We can have adequate markets and marketing strategies. They are really necessary. We need to focus more research and development for better management and efficiency. We need to improve strategic planning and training. And of course, achievement towards SDGs should underscore aquaculture advantages and benefits. More comparative research is required, especially with comparing with other food sectors. The next one, please. Oh, sorry, it is back to Carlos. It's back to you.
Thank you, Doris. We have 2 more slides to show you, and they are important ones, as we feel very strongly that, as you saw in some of our slides, that we feel that lake aquaculture needs much better governance. Continuing issues, we have too many informal farming activities. We have inadequate regulations, bureaucracy, we have inadequate biosecurity measures, and poorly trained personnel throughout the sector. Unfortunately, we believe that aquaculture is still considered the poor brother of captured fishes and aquaculture, and that not much attention is being paid by the political world in our sector. Still, captured fishes capture most of the attention of authorities, and we need to address this issue through public relations of our sector. We also have to face another issue, which is that producer organizations, being them from large scale or small scale producers, are not very strong, they're weak. And then government and producer organizations do not talk to each other to concentrate on policy issues and so on, and to solve the main long-term problems. We need better producer organizations throughout the sector, throughout the countries. Another issue that bothers us a lot is that we want to improve our aquaculture sector, but we have inadequate research and development policies. In fact, we invest very little in research and development, and whatever is being invested is not really well used. And one of the main issues is that management of our sector focus mainly on day-to-day issues, on contingency. Therefore, in terms of the way forward, we need to do a good number of things if we want to improve our aquaculture sector. even though we have a lot of opportunities, we have to produce good long-term development goals and plans. We have to improve legislation, rules and regulations. We have to improve the training of governmental personnel. Most personnel that works in aquaculture comes from fisheries, and they do not really necessarily understand whatever takes place in aquaculture as opposed to fisheries. There's also a need for stronger leadership by authorities and industry and farming leaders to address the main issues that are facing our sector. We have to encourage country-to-country cooperation. We have to encourage climate change adaptation, and we have to evaluate government programs that are giving a very poor results that keep being applied without proper evaluation. And lastly, we have to promote equally small and large-scale aquaculture. Each of these sectors play a different and complementary role. Small-scale aquaculture in terms of rural poverty, employment, and so on, and large-scale aquaculture in terms of the introduction of technology, efficiency, and so on. Our last slide refers to innovation, what we feel is a key to competitive and sustainable local aquaculture. As you well know, we have told you that aquaculture is mostly devoted to exports, and we in the internal markets compete very severely with chicken and pork. So we need a more efficient, sustainable, and competitive aquaculture, and this should be a continuous innovation process required. We have to introduce new technologies, and this is not a luxury. In fact, we have to get involved into recirculation and open ocean farming and access artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and the like, because what is happening right now is these novel technologies are central to competitiveness. Some of them will be central in the coming years. And the problem is that these new technologies will offset or diminish dramatically most of our comparative advantage links to local environmental conditions. So new technologies are not a luxury in our part of the world. It's a necessity and it's a must, and we have to address them. Unfortunately, we see that local governments nor industry face these realities with due anticipation, and chances are that this region might be ill-prepared to face severe competition in coming decades if we do not consider all these issues. So finally, we have to say that our options are very clear. We have to plan better. We need better leadership. We need more investment and incentives to foster a permanent innovation process. And innovation does not only require to focus on technology, but we have to strengthen soft capacities to convince society and promote further aquaculture as a viable and sustainable alternative to food production. And this is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Don Carlos, Doña Doris, and Don Ricardo, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I personally enjoyed it very much, considering that I have just spent a few years in Latin America. I found this a reflection of what's happening in this diverse region. So thank you very much. Let's move ahead with the webinar. Before starting the question and answer session, we will play 3 recorded video messages from panelists which are with us today. One is Doña Yanira Piedrahita. She's the Executive Director of the National Chamber of Aquaculture in Ecuador. We have with us Dr. Paul Gabardon, who is the Director of Agricultural Development Bank from Trinidad and Tobago. And then we have Doña Alicia Gallardo, who is the director of the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Service in Chile. So can I ask the Secretariat to please launch the recorded videos before starting the question and answer session? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yaira Piedrahita from the National Chamber of Aquaculture in Ecuador, and we represent the Ecuadorian shrimp industry. I am very glad to be with you in this virtual space, and thanks to FAO for this invitation. Aquaculture has evolved rapidly over the past 50 years, particularly in a number of species. Nonetheless, benefits have not been equally distributed. What would the aquaculture industry recommend to governments in order to foster a business environment which stimulates innovation and sustainable expansion inclusive of small-scale farmers? We need a clear legal framework that promotes development and effective controls along the way. The aquaculture legislation in our countries is recent or is applied by adapting from the fishing legislation, where activities are very different and regulations do not focus on the particular needs of activities. In many cases, small and medium farmers want to develop their businesses in a formal way, but it's complicated and represent high cost and time with the government offices. So they give up the paperwork and operate informally. This means that they cannot access to government support programs, they sell their products at lower prices, and sometimes even clandestinely, and they cannot access to international markets because they do not meet the requirements to export. We also need the development of technology for the diversification of species. This includes complete information on the species of interest, like reproduction, nutrition, farm management, diseases. Many local species are not developed because there is no demand from the big markets, because they do not know them. But there may be a local demand that makes the farming of these species economically attractive. On the other hand, with the species that have already developed market, small and medium farmers don't have the same level of productivity and efficiency as the large companies, since they lack technical staff to handle the farms and the technological tools that help improve productivity, like monitoring programs, automatic feeding, artificial aeration, harvesting methods, etc. This can be done through agreements with institutions and universities that carry out research activities. We need to promote the integration of producers and local distributors and sales chains, fostering the development of anchor companies in charge of marketing the products. As the small producers grow and get experience in the business, they will have the ability to explore new markets and internationalize. We also need training and technical support, at least at the beginning, so that producers can implement good aquaculture practices and can make a proper management of the farms. Finally, we need the access to financing with low interest credits instead of subsidies that generates a false profitability of the business and lead to an imminent failure as the government cannot finance forever. I think aquaculture in Latin America still has a great potential, and it is important that governments implement actions to promote its development in a properly and sustainable way. There is a lot of work, but there is a lot to learn, especially from Asia, where the activity has hundreds of years, and we can do it in the right way. The people like me who are dedicated to aquaculture have a great responsibility to contribute to feeding the world, and we must be aware of this. Thank you very much.
The vision for Caribbean aquaculture is a modern aquaculture industry that is profitable, internationally competitive, sustainable, and environmentally and socially responsible. The future of the Caribbean aquaculture industry must take this fledgling industry forward in a way that enhances national food security and meet our economic and environmental needs. Aquaculture can be a great, exciting, and a new source of innovation, but we need a framework that fosters that innovation as well as investment and sustainable businesses. Some of the biggest barriers to faster growth include lack of access to suitable sites to set up fish farms, land costs are sometimes prohibitive, lack of available water supply that is of adequate quantity, quality, and suitability, and access to technology, loans, and investment capital, which may be difficult. The Caribbean has a large potential for offshore mariculture. Trinidad and Tobago and the Bahamas have the largest potential with largely 8,500 and 4,100 square kilometers, respectively, for area for aquaculture. Demand for seafood is growing, but the domestic wild harvest is insufficient to meet new and increasing demands. Many regional and global competitors have seized this market opportunity, often affecting local producers, prices, and outcomes. We have a seafood trade deficit. When it comes to aquaculture, Trinidad and Tobago account for less than 5% of our total seafood consumed and exported. Caribbean countries may well take notice and seek ways to increase local production without compromising scarce foreign exchange, environmental degradation, and social displacement. There are still many practical, tried and true ways to produce sustainable seafood, marine algae, shellfish, without all the fanfare, massive spends, and huge losses. This is a huge opportunity for a sustainable business that can make excellent returns and penetrate new markets. The establishment of multi-stakeholder dialogue processes, national aquaculture policy platforms, and roundtable discussions are essential for the development of effective regulation based on scientific evidence and supported by the industry. For aquaculture to overcome the slow pace of development and critical challenges faced in the Caribbean, significant changes in approach are required. This includes a new phase of implementation with the input of private investment in the form of PPP, public-private partnerships, or independent investments with or without government support. The active role of grant funding for startups and training from world bodies can play an important role. Factors that may affect the prospects for this sector include land and water and associated conflicts, feed, seed supply and genetic resources, environmental integrity and disease problems. And we have seen disease problems wiping out aquaculture enterprises in the Caribbean before. Development and adoption of new and improved farming technologies, markets, trade and food safety, climate change, investment, capital impediments, and problems that can originate from unguided and unmonitored practices.
Hello all, I am Alicia Gallardo, the Director of the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Service from Chile. Thank you very much to the FIO to invite me to this relevant webinar on aquaculture and especially on sustainable aquaculture in our continent, in Latin America. And I hope you are well in the middle of this pandemic situation. Well, in Latin America, we are mainly producers in aquaculture, exporters, and also importers. So we need to work in a sustainable manner to try to supply all the world in the food safety issues and to try to advance in a sustainable manner to produce. So the question or the challenge are mainly how can we deal in a sustainable aquaculture in Latin America. First, I think it's very relevant to continue with the networking, collaboration, coordination, and communication between the countries. We are very powerful countries. We need to advance in this. We need to maintain this kind of networking. In the second, we need to continue strengthen our capabilities in the competent authorities. Each competent authority, not also in aquatic animal health, also in environmental issues, need to train, to do some training, need to be careful with the new information about the climate change, need to be prepared for the emergencies. And then we need to move working with science, especially with applied science. Focus in the main concerns about the One Health status, about the environmental, about the sea, different issues in the world, in the Latin America aquaculture, we need to learn about this. And then the fourth level is the capability to respond to emergencies. Because the climate change, we need a lot of difference, a lot of challenge in the sea especially, and we need to deal with this. We need to be prepared with a very action control as soon as possible. And then we need to work with the recommendation and standard of the international organization. We need to work with the OIE standard, focusing the trade, and we need to work with the recommendation of the FAO, very good tool as a PMP biosecurity. And finally, it's very relevant to work with the innovation and technology. The technology focusing for example, the monitor of the vessels in aquaculture, also the big data analysis, also the remote surveillance tool. This is very relevant for us to continue in this. I invite you to continue working in the sustainable aquaculture and to be powerful, because our responsibility as Latin America, as the second continent producer in aquaculture, is very high. Thank you very much.
Well, Yahira, Paul, and Alicia, thank you very much for your key messages and for the time you spent recording them. Just few observations, a few points that I noted down. Yahira mentioned the importance of developing targeted regulation for aquaculture and not adapting regulations for this sector from other sectors. She's also mentioned the fact on the importance to have access to financing with low interest and credit instead of subsidies, which are not sustainable on the long run. Paul, talking more about the Caribbean region, he mentioned of the lack of suitable farm sites, the cost of land, the access to fresh water, investment capital, and technologies, which are all challenges for these small states, Caribbean states. He did mention, however, that there is also an untapped potential, which is the potential of offshore mariculture in the Caribbean. He mentioned that the trade deficit in the Caribbean is also something that should really push the development of aquaculture, and the importance of strengthening private and public partnership should increase in the Caribbean region in particular. Whereas Alicia highlighted the importance of networking among sub-regions and networking within the region itself. And also, I think a very important point was strengthening the competence of competent authorities within the region, those authorities which are supposed to help the private sector develop their projects. And then finally, to adopt international standards like the EOE and FAO standards should really be considered as a priority. So with these remarks, let's move forward and start with the questions and answer. We have received few questions ahead. We have questions coming in from the question and answer box. So please, if you still have questions, go ahead, send them in the box below. Obviously, we cannot deal with all of them. We will use your questions to improve and finalize the review of the Latin American aquaculture and the Caribbean, and when the document will be finalized. I have here the first question, which is actually directed to Carlos Wurman. And this is the question, Carlos. There are big asymmetries among Latin American countries regarding the development of their aquaculture sector. How to narrow these gaps and create regional or sub-regional aquaculture alliances? Please, you have 1 minute.
Thank you for the question, Alessandro. These asymmetries are based on facts. There are too many differences in geographic, political, social conditions in each of our countries here. So it's very difficult to put together people and sit in the same room, people that might have very diverging interests. And on the other hand, I feel that not everybody is aware of aquaculture possibilities and outlooks. And therefore, I think we have to work more in country-to-country relationships rather than trying to work with global organizations that in the past have not proven to be successful. This is my view. Of course, we have improved the situation through many different means. For instance, by improving the capacity of the people that are dealing with aquaculture, showing people successful stories about what is taking place and so on. But to be perfectly honest, Alessandro, I'm not very hopeful that global organizations that put everybody together in one room with concrete and common targets is a viable proposition.
Carlos, thank you very much. The next question is addressed to Hira, and it reads as follows. Latin American and Caribbean producers and export large volumes of certain farm species, notably salmon, shrimp, and mussels. Do you see Latin American and Caribbean aquaculture diversifying with the production of endemic species or even non-endemic species for local markets and consumption? To you, Yahira. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. I think definitely we need to develop more endemic species in Latin America because we only have developed a few. In Ecuador, we only work with shrimp. Tilapia is not endemic, and also in some other countries, we have very important local species that could be developed and farmed in a very good way and could give some profit for the small and medium producers because are highly appreciated by the local population and constitute an important source of protein. Additionally, the development of local species causes less environmental impact, especially in terms of affecting biodiversity. I think governments and universities and public institutions and also the private industry should stimulate this type of projects with research and financing sources and training for people interested in produce local species. We have to develop complete technological packages to do that.
Yeah, Hira, thank you very much for your concise and answer. The third question is actually addressed to Paul. So Paul, this is the question. What do you consider are the main challenges to boost sustainable production in small island developing states, such as those of the Caribbean? It's a very complex question. Try to answer within a minute, please. Thank you. Paul, you have to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, most small island developing states have similar issues based on their size, small size, the fact that they have high energy costs. We sometimes have foreign exchange difficulties, competing tourism conflicts with aquaculture sites, and of course, climate change. And we have seen over the last few years where climate change, specifically with respect to flooding, with respect to hurricanes, have had severe devastation for small economies And this takes a pretty long time to recover. So it's very difficult in aquaculture development that we must have climate resilience facilities and a way to bounce back pretty quickly. There also is a lack of legislation, certainly if we want to look at mariculture. So that would have to be for the governments to put that in place. The availability of capital for aquaculture enterprises is also limited. And then you have competing industries like agriculture, certainly tourism, which is a large percentage of GDP in some of the islands. And then recently, the whole issue of COVID, which is threatening nutrition, food security, and of course, travel and transport. So basically, what's needed, and I must agree with the previous speaker that the different countries really need specific approaches to what they need, because there are quite different needs for different countries. The high energy costs, for example, that is across the region may not pertain to, say, Trinidad and Tobago, which has much lower costs. So with energy, certainly we should look at alternative energy sources that can power the aquaculture enterprises, and certainly key investments in infrastructure and institutions to help farmers to at least comply with international food safety standards, improve traceability, and so forth. It's a limited resource base, and there are a lot of pressures for economic development, and then it's complicated with high vulnerability to natural disasters and climate change impacts. However, I think that if a new phase of investment and intensive action towards sustainable development is done across the region, I think our production can go back up to where it was. And although it may look like a small percentage of the whole Latin American region, some of these small productions can make significant contribution to GDP, livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods as well, an alternative means of production for people.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. I realize it was not fair to give you such a short time to answer such a complicated question. So allow me to go straight into a question that has arrived for Alicia Gallardo from Cernapesca. Alicia, this is the question. The outbreak of farmed aquatic animal diseases have brought aquaculture industries to their knees. We saw this happening in Latin America as well. Now, how is the industry and the public authorities working to prevent this from happening again and ensuring that a strong biosecurity scheme across the region is well in place? Alicia, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Sandro. Thank you to Carlos and Doris and all the people. Well, the outbreaks in aquaculture in general in Latin America have been very damaged to our economies. So the recommendation is how to deal with this kind of emergencies is first to work together in the competent authorities and also the private sector. The industry need to be involved in the biosecurity approaches. If the industry can understand the useful of to use these measures, is not good to advance. So the networking or the work together between industry and private is the first issue. The second is to try to advance in into the strengthening of the competent authority. Obviously, we can use different tools as PVS tools from the OIE, Performance Veterinary Service, or auto-evaluation, I don't know, but we need some tool to evaluate our performance and to be in a improvement process, in a continuous process. The other issue is to monitor especially the emergency disease and the risk factor associated. We need to have information about the new diseases to be prepared in the case of an outbreak. And continue working with FIO. FIO has a program that called Implementation a Progressive Management Pathway for Improving Aquaculture Biosecurity. This is a approach, risk-based approach, considering the risk in each aquaculture, then the risk in all at the national level, and obviously focusing the trade also. So this is a good standard to know and to follow up. The other standard is the One Health approach. We need to work because COVID-19 is from an interface in the human and animal and environment issues. And finally, it's important to communicate because one country has an experience, another country has another experience. If we can to talk together about this, we need, it's very important to try to push for this. So I invite all the countries to continue working in this and of course to continue communication between us. The FIO webinars as this are very important instance to improve in this. Thank you, Sandro.
Alicia, thank you very much. We are really running out of time very fast, but I'm allowing myself to read one more question, considering the interest. The question is really addressed to either Doris Soto or Ricardo Norambuena, and this is the question: will a growth in market demand for fish and fish products in the smaller Latin American states or the Caribbean be a driver for aquaculture development in these states? However, will the availability of cheaper import products hinder such development? Doris, Ricardo, over to you.
Ricardo deals with Central America and the Caribbean, so I leave it to him.
Ricardo, okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, we think that the problem is not demand, if not supplies. Caribbean countries are net importers of seafood, and most of their economies depend on tourism. Therefore, competition with aquaculture for the limited space that might still be available will be fierce, and chances are that tourism will get the best part. This is true for inland and marine space. Most likely, then, aquaculture production, but for some cases, will remain rather limited, and Caribbean countries and territories will probably keep importing seafood products to meet their demands. If aquaculture evolves, it should mainly relate more to small-scale operations or highly sophisticated ones with limited production of high-valued products such as disease-free stock and the like. Offshore aquaculture could be an option, but this is still quite expensive and faces other challenges. Thank you, Sandra.
Ricardo, thank you very much. I could hear your dog trying to join into the answer of the question. Anyway, we don't have much time. I would like to thank all of you who have sent in questions. We will be dealing with all those questions and we'll make good use of them. Allow me to call back again Matthias Halvert to give his final thoughts and closing remarks to this webinar. The floor is yours, Matthias.
Well, thank you very much, Sandro. And thanks so much to our lead authors, to Carlos, to Doris, to Ricardo, and to all our distinguished panelists. It's my great pleasure really to give some concluding remarks, and I'm excited to see that so many participants have decided to stay on even though we are a little bit over time. I think a few thoughts. Given that aquaculture output from this diverse region has seen important growth, and this growth being mainly focused in South America on a few species only, I find it quite interesting to note that at the same time, species diversification is being taken up by member countries. and that's increasingly so, and considering endemic species. And I think these efforts should really be further supported and encouraged. Also to produce fish and fish products that are accessible more to the local markets in terms of pricing. And as was alluded to earlier, these endemic species may actually be liked much more by the local people. And continuing on the seafood consumption, and in fact the low seafood consumption in the region with half the world average, that may be partly responsible for the industry focusing on the export market. We need to acknowledge, I think, and actually call for more of the efforts that are made to improve fish consumption through nationwide educational programs and the introduction of fish in school diets and similar. Another point is that the region includes all these SIDS of the Caribbean, which, as we heard, are net fish importers. So technical matters, particularly related to affordable and quality seed supply of suitable species, still remains an issue and will be important to tackle. And then, as came out clearly in the presentation by our lead authors, a stronger regional R&D is recommended to push the sector forward, but also for the benefit of single countries. And this includes assisting the sector, particularly the artisanal, the small scale sector that needs our help, and to adopt marketing strategies that will not only help these operators to stay in business, but to also see a growth in these small scale and family farm aquaculture operations. And in this regard, from FAO side, we really look forward to a stronger networking in the region, particularly through the RED de Acuicultura de las Americas, the aquaculture network for the Americas. So many more issues were flagged, and but let me finish with one that particularly struck me as important, also for FAO to possibly accompany you along the way. And that is the development and full adoption of long-term development goals and plans at different levels will likely pave the way for aquaculture to further expand. I mean, surely this will be a prerequisite for allocating national budgets and facilitating investments from the private sector that you must be looking for. So with this, I will conclude, and I look forward to discussing many of these issues face-to-face, hopefully with you next year, both in Shanghai at the Global Conference on Aquaculture in September, but also at the next session of the COFI Subcommittee on Aquaculture, which is scheduled to be held in Mexico late 2021. So with this, once again, many thanks to all of you, and back to you, Sandro.
Matthias, thank you very much for your closing remarks and the information that you shared. I would like to thank on our behalf in FAO the authors of the review. They still have work to do, especially with all the questions that we've been receiving. I would like to thank the invited panelists for sharing their times and their views with us. And I would like to thank all the colleagues that have actually helped us put these webinars together, including the Regional Fisheries Officer in Latin America, Santiago, Panama, and Barbados. And I take this opportunity to inform you that tomorrow at 1300 hours, the Central Eastern European time, there will be the last webinar. The webinar will be on the State of World Aquaculture 2020. I hope you can make it. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you will enjoy the one tomorrow. Thank you, and have a good day. Bye for now.